In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm Mark Zaccaria.
I'm April Giarrusso. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. If you're a numbers nerd and you're looking for a reading on the latest economic figures, you've come to the right place. If you're a punter willing to place a small bet on the future of the state of Rhode Island's second leading source of income, you've also found your seat at the table. In fact, if you're a prophet of doom on the topic of post-employment funding for our public service retirees, you too will find something to float your boat in this week's edition of Common Sense. We will also feature an in-depth interview conducted by State Representative Patricia Morgan. This week, she'll be talking with Mike Cerulo of What's the Rush RI, a group promoting that we wait to legalize marijuana until we really know the outcome in Colorado. Between segments of that detailed briefing, Mark and I will reappear to ask the satiric question, "Are you kidding me?" As usual, our show will conclude with the ponderings of Portsmouth pundit Jeff Richard. This week, Jeff will give us his thoughts on adult coloring books. To get it all started though, let's look at our analysis of 3 of the top stories that have an impact on the Ocean State this week. Mark?
Thanks, April. Last week, we heard revised figures for Rhode Island for the jobless rate, the total number of jobless Rhode Islanders, and the all-important labor participation rate. Spoiler alert, they were all revised in the wrong direction. That's right, the official unemployment percentage for the Ocean State that was reported in December was revised in light of new data that's come in. It was reported at an annualized 5.1% rate, but upon sufficient reflection, it now stands at 5.4%. And that might not seem like much to you, but to the nearly 2,000 additional neighbors of ours who are out of work, it is a big deal. What may be a bigger deal is the voodoo economics practiced by the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training, which stood by the lower numbers as the administration and the General Assembly basked in them during the start of the new legislative session. The March revision of the December numbers meant that the jobless rate for the entire calendar year went back up over the 6% mark. That may be a purely psychological barrier, but psychology plays a central role in the economics of the recovery from a recession. What's worse, the labor participation rate moved downward after DLT's review of the tea leaves. In fact, it's now down to just a fraction over 60% of all able-bodied Rhode Islanders within the age range for full-time employment. Do you think that decline in those even looking for work correlates to an increase in welfare, WIC, EBT, Section 8 housing, and disability claims? You bet it does. So what happens when less than 50% of us are employed? It's nice for the government that it was able to hold its thumb on the scale for long enough that no one but us would be paying attention. Whether or not that subterfuge kept the rabble from being roused is debatable. The real signal in all of this is how critical it is that we get our economy growing again without some recognition on the part of government that it has to trim its sails cost-wise and deliver its services much more effectively. We will not see a reestablishment of conditions here that will let that growth happen. So when you're questioning candidates for the state legislature this fall, be sure to ask them how long they think we can survive with higher and higher welfare bills, but no one to pay them. Of course, they'll solemnly say, that's bad. But will they pledge to make the heavy political lift to really cut back in order to fix it? April?
I wouldn't bet on that, Mark. Speaking of which, earlier this month, Rhode Island lawmakers sent legislation to Governor Raimondo regarding a new casino to be located in Tiverton. Raimondo signed the legislation and put the vote to the people of Rhode Island in this November's ballot. Voters in Tiverton and statewide will be asked to approve building a casino right by the Massachusetts border. The operator of that casino, Twin River Management Group, wants to close the flailing Newport Casino and transfer its gambling license to Tiverton. If the casino passes, the state would receive 15.5% of proceeds from table games and 61% from video and slot machines. This would also guarantee the town of Tiverton at least $3 million a year. Realizing the income projections for the Tiverton gaming venue will rely heavily on how successful the Ocean State is in frightening Bay State interests farther away from the border with their proposed southeastern Mass entry into the gaming sweepstakes. That's yet another gamble being taken by Twin River. I don't know how this will turn out, but I know one thing. My mother is going to drag me to that casino on opening day. Love you, Mom. Back to you, Mark.
April, earlier this segment, I asked the question whether or not state legislators could read the handwriting on the wall and then do something about it amid mounting signals of economic collapse. Last week, WPRI.com's Dan McGowan asked the same question of Providence city officials as regards their woefully underfunded pension system. It seems that when then-Mayor Angel Tavares negotiated a cost-saving settlement with pensioners in 2012, there was a vote of all union members to ratify it. During that vote count, the city counted each abstention as a yes vote, and the measure passed handily. That ratified deal froze COLAs at 3% for 10 years and provided for no COLA ever at 5% or above. The agreement also shifted all retirees of 65 years or older into Medicare. Shortly thereafter, 65 union members who had abstained from the vote sued the city over their designation as having approved and to be exempted from the new plan. In 2 weeks, that lawsuit will be argued before Superior Court Judge Sarah Taft Carter. By the way, it was Taft Carter who approved the 2012 deal in the first place. So you can handicap the outcome of this action for yourself. The point is, the city cannot settle because the agreement under contention itself permits retirees to opt out if any future settlement offers better terms. If the renegade union members somehow prevail, that cancels the 4-year-old plan. Oh, and by the way, as financial guru Mike Riley has been pointing out and proving over and over again recently, even if the deal stays intact, the city's unfunded pension liability grew to over $900 million in 2015, and the fund had to pay out some $6.6 million more in regular benefits than it took in through contributions and interest. So, Mayor Lorza, you too have 1 foot on the gunnel and 1 foot on the pier as the boat is leaving. Do you think you either jump one way or the other relatively soon? And if so, which way will it be? April?
Thanks, Mark. If the mayor goes for a swim, will he shout back to the general treasurer to come on, the water's fine? Before we move to the first segment of Pat Morgan's interview, let's take a moment to ask the question, are you kidding me?
In an October 2010 email released as part of the 38 Studios investigation, AFL-CIO strongman George Nee writes to his cohort Michael Sabatoni. The object is to secure a well-paid but not too taxing position with the software startup for the daughter of one of their other union colleagues. Quote, being on the EDC, it would be inappropriate for me to call, but given your contacts with them, would you feel okay putting in a call on her behalf? Unquote. Mr. Nee writes, do you think Nee understood that he was asking a favor which wouldn't actually pass the smell test? Are you kidding me? The real question here might be, does he care? In the blog Anchor Rising, Justin Katz recently reported on the amazing success Nee's daughter Bridget has had during her tenure as the development manager for nonprofit Year Up's activities in Providence. During that time, the agency was able to receive a little under $200,000 in state grants to do its good work. Much of that came from the Governor's Workforce Board, on which Bridget's dad is an influential member. According to the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, a 2010 investigation revealed that at least half of the GWB's 16-member board was employed by businesses, nonprofits, or unions that received money from the agency. The Ocean State's Department of Environmental Management has long ago outlawed cesspools. It seems that state government remains grandfathered in despite that DEM ruling. The real question here might be, do we care? And if so, what are we prepared to do about it this November? Or are you all just kidding me? This week on Common Sense, Representative Pat Morgan sits with Mike Cerulo, a spokesperson for What's the Rush, RI, a group advocating that we wait and see the real results of Colorado's legalization of marijuana before we take similar action here. April and I take a close look at 3 news stories on our radar. Jeff Richard comes by and adds his take on adult coloring books. Of course, we also ask our favorite question, are you kidding me? Come by and get some common sense, Rhode Island.
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today Michael Cerulo, who is a licensed psychotherapist in private practice. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I feel welcome.
Well, I'm glad you came today. Mike is going to be talking to us about medical marijuana today. Later, we're going to have him back to talk about recreational marijuana. The two are obviously really connected very strongly, but I thought we'd start with medical marijuana because we've actually already enacted that. We actually have a law that has allowed it. Since 2006, we have compassion centers since 2011, I believe. And in your practice, working with children and their families, you've run into, I'm sure, some of the bad effects and good effects, perhaps, of medical marijuana.
Well, that's very true. My practice does run the entire spectrum. It runs from adolescents and their families through midlife and beyond men. And often it involves men who have been struggling with substances over the course of their lives, and their relationship with marijuana is pretty clear. I also do a lot of work with youth and young adults who are in the juvenile justice or the criminal justice system. So marijuana is a character in their stories in a lot of ways. With the adolescents, the biggest single problem is diversion of medical marijuana. Diversion of it. Most medical marijuana, whether it's looked at here in the in Rhode Island or elsewhere, is the youth will tell you that they're getting it from medical marijuana card holders, family members who have cards. We have 14,000 card holders in the state. We have 2,500 plus cultivators, people who are able to be caregivers who can grow marijuana for people who have medical marijuana cards. And studies both in Colorado, 85% of residents in a treatment program out there say that they got their marijuana from medical marijuana use. They've diverted it.
Okay,
And
so
that's the
people
same
who
thing.
have a prescription don't
right.
use it all? And
Right, or that the youth
Or they-
find ways to get it from medical marijuana. It's sold because there's a lot of excess production for those 14,000 people. There is a lot of medical marijuana being
All right, so
produced
let's, for
that gets
the
diverted.
viewers, patients can grow their own plants,
That's correct.
and they're allowed to have 12 plants, 6 plants?
They have the ability to have a lot for themselves, and then the caregivers can also produce a
And
lot. Up to
caregivers
5
can have
people.
more because they
They can
can
have
have
more.
people that they supply it to.
Right, and that's a moving number. That's part of what's going on in the General Assembly right now in terms of adjusting the numbers.
Okay, in both places, a patient has to have a prescription from a doctor saying that they have certain illnesses that entitle them to either grow or purchase medical marijuana. And the caregiver has to, what do they have to do to get a license to grow?
They have to apply to the Department of Health and meet certain criteria, including not having drug-related felonies in their history.
Okay.
Most of the regulations at Department of Health have to do with the business of marijuana, not the medical side of marijuana.
Okay, and that is one of the things that you're concerned about.
That's what we feel, that before anything further is done in the world of marijuana legalization, further expansion of the definitions of what you would think of as a debilitating condition, certainly any expansion into the world of mental health conditions, that we need to fix what is woefully inadequate in terms of regulation in the medical marijuana program. We have no medical marijuana, we have no regulations that address product safety, product integrity, product packaging. So we have nothing that says, we have no procedures in place for what would be considered contaminants in medical marijuana product. We have no restrictions on dosing. You cannot say that there is, take the case of baby aspirin, which lots of us take at our age for cardiovascular health. Okay, 81 grams or milligrams or whatever in that dose. There's nothing like that in marijuana. You don't know whether you're getting you can go in and buy what they call Girl Scout cookies now, pre-rolled joints at a medical marijuana compassion center.
Girl Scout cookies?
They call them Girl Scout cookies, and they have 14% THC contract. One of my patients actually told me about this. And that joint is 8 times more powerful in concentration than the joint we would have smoked in the 70s and the 80s. Concentration. So dosing is a problem. There's nothing like that.
All right, so let's just so safety.
Product
do you
safety.
mean, let's just talk about product safety.
Okay.
First, and then we'll go into dosing and contaminants, or is contaminants in product safety? It must be.
They're all related. They're all related, but just dosing is a major problem.
Because people can smoke as much as they want. There's no...
Right. For example...
If you have a headache, you only take a migraine headache or whatever. Okay.
So for example, the FDA approves medical marijuana, has approved for a long, long time, marijuana, synthetic marijuana basically, the active ingredients that suppress nausea and increase appetite.
Oh, for people with cancer.
That's right. Those are the non-psychoactive. That's the stuff that doesn't get you high. That's the part of marijuana that doesn't get you high, without getting technical about it. So that's it.
So you
but what happens is that
how do you buy that?
So you buy that at the compassion center, but you buy marijuana that's got very high ratios of THC in it. Very hard to find something with a low concentration of THC in a compassion center today. I have 3 patients that look for it and they can't find it. They have to buy more THC to CBD, which is the stuff that doesn't get you. THC gets you high. CBDs help you with appetite and nausea suppression.
Okay.
So you can't find that generally in a compassion center.
Why not?
There's no real answer to it other than nobody's producing it. Nobody's breeding it for that. And it isn't something that people buy. That isn't what people go in looking for, except certain individuals who really don't want to get high.
Okay, but if they're getting it for nausea and stuff, So nobody's producing it, but they should, basically.
That's
If you're a
correct.
cancer patient, that's what you want.
That's correct.
You
And then
don't
there's
want to
the-
get high,
right.
you want to
Right, and then there's
control
the
the
whole
nausea.
question of not just smoked marijuana, but there's the question of edibles or medibles or vaped marijuana, which is concentrated marijuana. So you can take a chunk of marijuana brownie, or you can take a chunk of marijuana chocolate, or you can take a gummy bear, and you have no idea what the concentration of THC is in that product. None, zero.
Okay, we're going to have to stop you right there for a minute, and we'll continue this when we get back.
A member of the State Finance Committee is ignoring a court order to pay his bills. Are you kidding me? How poetic. Someone on a finance committee who won't pay his bills. It has been 2 years since a judge ordered Senator Jamie Doyle and his company, Doyle Respiratory, to pay a former business partner, and he has yet to fork over a cent. Melissa Bruno, the owner of Phoenix Administrators LLC, is still waiting for Doyle's first payment, which does not include interest or late fees. But she told the Valley Breeze that she isn't holding her breath. Now, the amount he owes is over $6,000, and she agreed to a $200 monthly payment from Doyle merely because she didn't think that she'd get what she was owed if she asked for any higher. Other than this, it looks like Doyle Respiratory has had other significant finance issues. There are 4 companies that have judgments against the Pawtucket-based medical equipment company, and a correspondence between attorneys claims that Doyle Respiratory owes the IRS, quote, tens of thousands of dollars, unquote. So during the course of waiting for this debt to be paid, Bruno has lost money, lost her business partner who worked with her on the Doyle Respiratory deal, and has had to pay her own court costs. And she still isn't getting paid. Again, I state that a finance committee member not paying his court-ordered bills is poetic. So here's a poem about it. There once was a Pole who owed plenty from his perch on the finance committee. After more than 2 years, he was still in arrears. So I have to ask, do you kid me?
This week on Common Sense, Representative Pat Morgan sits with Mike Cerulo, a spokesperson for What's the Rush, RI, a group advocating that we wait and see the real results of Colorado's legalization of marijuana before we take similar action here. April and I take a close look at 3 news stories on our radar. Jeff Richard comes by and adds his take on adult coloring books. Of course, we also ask our favorite question, are you kidding me? Come by and get some common sense, Rhode Island.
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today Mike Cerulo, who's a licensed psychotherapist in private practice. And in the course of his practice, he has worked with a lot of individuals who have been involved with marijuana, right? Let's put it that way, been involved with marijuana.
Very common. Very, very common.
Mike, we were talking about the fact that there, right now in Rhode Island, even though we've had medical marijuana for about 10 years, there's no safety requirements. It's a medicine, it's a prescription, and yet we don't treat it like a prescription in a lot of ways.
This is absolutely correct. We do not. Whether it's dosing or product labeling that talks about side effects, or the purity of the product, whether or not it's produced under what would be considered high standards of product purity, the way you would a food.
Yeah, you were mentioning that there are different edibles and even, what do you call it, the leaves? I've never smoked marijuana in my life, so you gotta give
There are 3
but
ways
that there are what percentages of THC, which is the,
Right.
and then there's, what was the other thing you talked about that actually controls the nausea?
Well, those are the inactive they're the ones that don't get you high. That's
Is there
CBD.
a CBD?
CBD is
So if
the
it
best
was
way
really
to-
a medicine, we would be labeling that. If you buy
That's
this,
correct.
you get this much CBD and
Then-
this
right,
much THC.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And it's often labeled, but the product itself with very low levels of THC is not available frequently in the compassion centers. My patients have a difficult time finding that and often end up with
So
something.
you're an elderly person and you've
Right.
got cancer and you just want to control that, get your weight
Right.
back up, you can't
Yeah,
find it.
Yeah. No, or you're somebody with chronic pain and you're 50 and it's serious pain and you've tried everything else and you go after THC, you go after marijuana for that purpose, for chronic pain, and you can't find anything that doesn't get you high, but you still have to drive.
And you don't want to be in a purple haze, you just want to get rid of the pain.
There's 3 ways to take marijuana in. Smoking it, vaping it through these new pens where...
Oh, like a regular cigarette
Like a
pen?
regular cigarette pen. You can. Those are all basically able to also take concentrated marijuana, and you can use that. And in schools, a lot of youth are using those because it doesn't smell.
Okay.
So no one knows whether they're smoking a cigarette.
And what is that, an
marijuana.
oil?
It's a concentrated oil or liquid of some kind that's put there. And then the third way to ingest it is through edibles, gummy bears, brownies, pieces of candy that look like, well, I compare it in my age to a little X-Lax tablet, the little chocolate X-Lax tablets that we used to see at one point. But they're little pieces of chocolate. They look like candy.
All right.
So those are the 3 ways to get it in.
So there's not a pill,
right.
they're edibles.
Well, there are pills, but they're synthetic.
You,
they're right. You smoke it, you vape it,
or you can eat it.
Or you can eat it.
Okay, so you were talking about contaminants. I suppose the contaminants come in the edibles more, or no?
Well, there are contaminants in terms of the way you extract the concentrates.
Yeah, I'd heard.
So
what was
butane.
that?
Butane is one of them. They use alcohol, methanol or ethanol, both of which can be toxic and I think those 2 are considered carcinogens. All 3 of those have carcinogenic properties, as I understand it.
So can I just stop you before you go on? So that scares me when I hear that butane and all these things are being used to what? They take the THC out of the leaves, is that it?
Right.
Has any kind of studies been done about how that might lead to another health issue?
Well, that's one of the big problems, that we don't have standards for that. The American Chemical Society indicates that we need to do that because we have no way of knowing what the residues are. We have no idea what the interactions of the 390 or so components of grown marijuana have. We just don't know what that impact is.
What do you mean 390 components?
There are 300 to 400 different components to marijuana. Okay?
So different chemicals,
So it could
you
be
mean?
different chemicals, different types of chemicals that can have impacts. We don't know what they are. We certainly don't have standards with respect to, in the case of the concentrated oils, we have no way at this point of knowing what is an acceptable level of residue for butane. Take that one thing, because that's the most commonly used solvent to get to the concentrated material that ends up in the
cookie
medibles,
or whatever.
Cookies. We have no way of knowing what level of at this
that is
point
safe
is okay. We don't know that yet. We just don't know that.
And I know cigarettes have filters on them. Marijuana joints don't.
Right.
So is there a problem with ash getting into the lungs or anything? Have they done any
I've
studies on
not seen
that?
anything on ash, but I have seen things on the impacts on long-term chronic
respiratory
problems like COPD. I've seen studies like that put people at higher risk for that. There are about a third less, as I remember, a third less carcinogenic compounds in marijuana that we know. Less than there were
than in
tobacco.
A cigarette. Okay.
But you don't get 2/3 less cancer if cancer is part of it.
Yeah.
We know that
either have it or you don't.
Yeah, we know that there are
Okay.
cardiovascular effects, increases in seizures, for example, or the cardiovascular event in the brain
activity?
No, I'm talking about what causes I'm lost on the
stroke or
on the word, strokes, on brain strokes.
Okay.
Stroke is the word.
I have those senior moments,
You're quite
too.
right. Well, I'm having definitely a senior moment. Definitely a senior moment. But we know that there's that. We know that if you start smoking it at 14, you've doubled the risk of testicular cancer. We know that. There's solid research on that stuff.
Okay.
So going back to the product
So there are
purity.
health risks in it.
Absolutely there are physical
And you're
health
saying
risks.
that we really haven't done enough, we're not regulating it enough, the producers, so that they have to label.
That's right. They're not
And let
labeling
people
those
know.
risks.
They're not controlling the amount of
THC that's in
or
there.
DB.
Or as opposed to CBD.
CBD.
They're not, for the most part, providing very low concentrations of THC.
Okay.
Okay.
They're not letting people know what there's what percentages of butanes or alcohols are in it.
They really don't know what is a safe level of butane residue.
Okay.
They don't even know that, let alone
How much is actually in the product.
still left. Right. They have no way of knowing whether there are any naturally occurring toxins like funguses. They're called mycotoxins.
Okay.
It's a natural product. It grows. We have no idea what the safe levels of that are.
They don't put insecticides and stuff on
Well, they do.
this.
They put
Oh, they do?
pesticides on them, and they don't know very often what the residue of the pesticides is, but they do know that some of the pesticides are poisonous. We know that.
Okay, well, on that.
This is about product integrity,
Okay,
product safety.
so
It's
on-
not there. There are no existing standards for it.
Okay, so on that lovely, we're going to come back.
There is a war going on, and we have to band together to fight an incessant and vigilant enemy. That's right. It's time again for our State House to take on the threat of overgrown shrubbery. Are you bleeping kidding me? Senator Frank Chacon of Providence and North Providence submitted legislation that would make it a violation of state law to allow trees and shrubs, and their leaves or petals, to cause an abutting property owner unnecessary work or costs. I'm all for being neighborly, but I really need someone to tell me why this deserves any attention by our state representatives. Seriously. Someone has to pick up an errant petal and claim violation of state law? How exactly are we going to enforce this? Are we going to give our state troopers weed whackers to carry around? Actually, that might be terrifying. Even better still, this is not the first time Senator Chacon has submitted this type of legislation. For 2 years running, this has been submitted. As it turns out, last year only 3 senators voted against it, but the bill was lost in the scuffle of last year's quick end of session. So here's to hoping that we don't all have to lose our minds over a bit of shrubbery. Seriously, dude, we get it. You hate your neighbor's magnolias. But why you gotta drag us into that? Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today Michael Cerulo, who is a licensed psychotherapist in private practice, and he's studied medical marijuana a lot. Actually, you've studied marijuana a lot, I think. You're really, it's something that you've taken on because you know that it can help and it can hurt.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be described as the world's foremost expert
But
in
you've
marijuana,
really
but I've
studied
listened to
it.
a lot of them, and I've read a lot of them. And in a month, the end of March, I'll be at a National Institute of Health Summit on the current state of research into the neuroscience of marijuana.
Okay, and what's happening in Colorado and some of these states where they've legalized it already?
Right, and that particular subject is being covered on April 5th by a forum that the Attorney General has put forth, in which he's bringing people from Colorado and Washington State and Oregon, and people with experience in terms of what the impacts on public safety, on public health, on crime, all of those things have been in those states since legalization. So we're going to know a lot more about that.
Yeah, and I'm going to get you back when those come, but I did want to go on because we were just talking about the fact that the product integrity is not been studied enough, and it's not being secured or insured enough for patients. So they're buying stuff, and there may be things in it that are harmful to them, and they don't know that. So I guess, what are some of the problems that you have seen, or helps that you have seen
Okay.
from people who are getting the prescription? And what are some of the dangers? Okay, so I've got chronic pain.
You've got chronic pain.
I'm going.
90% or more of the medical card holders in this state, marijuana card holders in this state, are using it for chronic pain of one kind or another. Now, it's really important when you're dealing with that to have monitoring by a medical professional, preferably the one who diagnosed the pain
Okay, so
condition.
you have marijuana or MS or something, a doctor has told you have it. Mm-hmm. The doctor signed off.
Right. The
And-
doctor produces a diagnosis.
Okay.
And under the current regulations, there is no requirement for that person to go back to that doctor ever if they don't want to. They just go every 6 months to someone who is not the doctor that originally diagnosed it, and most often not a specialist in the field, whatever it is. So if, for example, the way the current regulations are written and the proposed legislation in the world that's most affecting me, mental health, my world that I spend the most time in, of course, they want to legalize or add to the list of debilitating conditions. They want to add to that list PTSD, post-traumatic stress, a mental health condition.
I've had emails about that.
So they want to do this, and what's very, very clear is that that's a dangerous thing to do.
Why?
Because it is the problem with marijuana is that it creates an hallucinogenic effect.
It changes your
belief systems, or changes. You can get paranoia. You can get psychosis from marijuana.
From marijuana?
From marijuana. There's a condition called cannabis-induced psychosis. So here's an example of why it's dangerous to do that, and why it's equally dangerous, if you're going to do that, to not require ongoing treatment and monitoring by a psychiatrist and a mental health professional such as myself. You need to be under treatment, and it's got to be frequent.
So you're taking the drug as well as being monitored
by somebody who knows you as a patient and has the professional competence to really understand what's going on and to manage it if they're dangerous. So I have a young man with whom I've worked in collaboration with a psychiatrist for 5 years. This is a man in his mid-30s with a history of post-traumatic stress disorder since his youth. He went to Colorado with some friends, and he decided to try. He'd never done any substances. He decided to try marijuana. So he took a piece of medical marijuana, and he ate it. And within about 4 hours, I got a phone call. He had become suicidal. He had become psychotic, okay? Now, these are conditions for which I was treating him before, and we had stabilized him over that period of time. Very functional, perfectly comfortable, very, very limited in his responses by that time. You would say that the PTSD was in remission. It took us 3 months of daily contact, either by phone or personally, to help him process what was going on during that period of time.
Because the chemical was in his brain?
Because the marijuana had that side effect. So if he had not already had in place treatment, that young man would have been in serious trouble over that 3-month period. It was only because he had a medical professional with expertise in mental health working with him frequently that he was able to deal with that. That's why we need to have medical professionals, specialists in the various fields that are associated with this.
Involved with the patients as they...
Involved with it. You don't want to be prescribing medical marijuana to somebody who has a history of addiction, for example.
Well, you know, if it really is a prescription and it is really medicine, I mean, I can't go to a doctor and just say, give me the prescription and you're never going to see me again, right?
Exactly.
They do monitor you. They you know, even if you call in to get a refill, they're going to want to see you at least once a year, I think. But if it's with the mind, probably more often than that.
Most of the experts I talk with, the medical people who do prescribe in any field, pain management, for example, are wanting to see you much more frequently than once a year.
Yeah, I think so too.
They need to see
I mean,
you
just
more
from
than
my
once a year.
personal experience, and again, I've never smoked it myself, but I went to Kent State University. This was back in the day when that was just
Sure.
becoming the thing. And I had a really close girlfriend who started smoking marijuana. And within a couple of months, she had painted her apartment black and started talking about suicide. And I didn't know what to do at the time, you know. It was just, I was just a kid myself, but she went from this sunshiny kind of person to a very depressed and suicidal person. And it didn't end well. So that's one of the things I always worry about. You don't know if you're that person, right? And if it's medical marijuana or any kind, you need to have somebody monitoring you. You need to have those resources.
Absolutely. If you're going to start taking it, marijuana can induce these conditions. There are, at any given time, for youth between the ages of 13 and 18, for example, 1 in 5 of them has a marijuana-sensitive condition. Anxiety spectrum conditions, mood disorders. They're addicted to some other substance, or they're in trouble with some other substance.
So 1 in 5.
1 in 5, and that's just in the youth population. So we know that these conditions are dangerous and can unmask or trigger, for example, a severe depression. We know that they can trigger that
Yeah.
if the vulnerability is there already.
All right, well, that's a somber thing. We're going to come back in just a few moments.
The City of Providence has long used tax stabilization agreements, or TSAs, as a method of attracting new development. Some of these agreements can be pretty complicated. In return for a break on property taxes for some specified period, developers promise to do all sorts of useful chores around town, such as hiring specific numbers or establishing other new businesses. But if the city then goes to sleep once new construction begins, none of those additional promises are kept. Are you kidding me? As Kate Nagel reported last week in Go Local Prov, it happens just that way all too often. Her case in point was the 30-year deal signed with the original owners of the Providence Place Mall in the mid-90s. In return for hundreds of millions in property tax relief, the owners were supposed to create a retail workers training center, contribute to advertising to promote the Down City area, work with RIPTA to create shuttle service to and from the mall, establish a Down City cinema in a location other than the mall, and organize a downtown management district, whatever that is. As you may have already guessed, the Providence Place Mall got all the tax relief, but none of the other stuff was ever even started. Now there are 2 subsequent owners of the property, neither of which say they know anything about these extra responsibilities. As a further complication, Providence City Councilman Kevin Jackson has his nose out of joint, claiming that only the council can create or amend a TSA. So how could this one have just disappeared? Meanwhile, the Alorza administration is now concerned that their efforts to use this exact same bait will be compromised. Do you think there's any finger-pointing in progress? Here's my point. The next time government says they can handle the management of anything even remotely connected to the private sector, here's what you say. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. We're talking about medical marijuana today, and we're talking with Mike Cerulo, who's a licensed psychotherapist. And you've done an awful lot of study on this. We were talking about the fact that marijuana, medical marijuana, really has very few safeguards, it sounds to me, and it's not, right? the product integrity is not being ensured, we don't know about dosing, and we don't monitor the patients once they start on it, and they can develop things. We often hear about marijuana being a gateway drug to harder drugs, I guess. Is there a science there? Has it been studied?
So there's so much co-occurrence and so much correlation. Youth will tell you that when they go out on Friday night, they start with a couple of beers, they may be with a group of people, they get a little loosened up, and then they start looking for something else, whether it's marijuana or whatever else might be available. So there's absolutely that kind of co-occurring thing. One of the emerging areas of research on direct relationships between marijuana and another substance are the opioids. We are beginning, there's some solid research I just recently saw from Harvard, coming out of Harvard, that is has recognized that someone who starts using marijuana at a young age is much more likely to eventually have an opioid dependence than even someone who starts with alcohol earlier and becomes addicted to opioids.
So there's a higher likelihood.
A higher likelihood. Now, the rest of it's about parsing language. Is it a gateway, or is it associated with it? So that kind of conversation is taking place now at a much higher level of science than used to be available. Because
so they're studying why that happens?
They're studying why that happens. They're discovering that it happens. They've got some very good animal studies that are showing that link because of the similarities in the way opioids affect our brain system and marijuana affects our brain system. This is something that's coming out of the same kinds of technology that are used to save our lives when a brain surgeon goes into our brain and takes a tumor out. I mean, we trust it for that. Let's trust what we're learning from the same technology. That's one of our positions. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with medical marijuana.
Yeah, I mean, it does help people, right? If you have cancer, it really does help you. If you have any number of really chronic diseases, it helps people.
We know that people are saying that it does. We also know that there are components that appear to help us, but we still don't have a lot of solid evidence. That NIH summit is going to talk about this in the area of about 8 of those debilitating conditions. The current state of solid evidence, that's what we're going to learn about. There is progress being made, but it's being made in a very disciplined way now that the government has loosened the restrictions on access to marijuana by serious researchers. That just recently happened.
Oh, so researchers,
we need to take what we think is good about marijuana and fine-tune it so that we can prove it and know what specific aspect of marijuana, what particular components are producing that effect.
And also take the bad effects out.
That's correct.
Any kind of prescription that any pharmaceutical does, if there's side effects, they have to work to get rid of the side effects.
Yeah.
Right?
Or they're going to tell you what they are.
They have to label them and say this is what it'll happen.
Right. And you want to know that the product is pure. You want to know that it's pure.
That you're not going to get cancer because you're taking it for headaches or something.
Right. Or whatever other potential problems there are. You want to be able to know about it, and you want to be able to eliminate those components of the marijuana that are not needed to address the problem you're trying to address.
Okay, but you have seen it help people.
I've seen people who get relief from pain.
Okay.
I have family members who use it to manage nausea and increase appetite. And under the right circumstances, that's a healthy thing.
Okay.
This is not about being against medical marijuana per se. It's about let's get it right.
Get it right.
Okay.
And PTSD, you said that's something that really needs to be studied a whole lot more.
The young man that I was talking about before said this: prescribing medical marijuana, prescribing marijuana for a mental health condition is like prescribing a laxative for diarrhea. It's just going to make it worse. And that's what every mental health professional that I've ever talked with or read is saying about trying to put PTSD into the law.
Because we hear
Among
about
others.
veterans coming back and you don't want them to be suffering from PTSD, but you don't want to make it worse either.
This is correct. And there is some emerging research that says it might be helpful under two conditions. First, if it's done right away, and secondly, for a 6 to 8 week period under the supervision of a mental health professional. And thirdly, the only anecdotal evidence they've got so far, for the most part, is that they're using a synthetic marijuana.
Okay, all right. I know you could talk about this all day long, but we're going to move on because there are some bills that are winding their way through the legislature right now on medical marijuana.
On medical marijuana and others. Medical marijuana, the primary bill that's going through right now that's important is that they want to add PTSD to the list of debilitating conditions. Well, the problem there is that currently the way that legislation is phrased is that there's no requirement for monitoring on a frequent basis, and there's no requirement that it be the treatment of last resort.
Okay.
Okay? That needs to go in if, in fact, it's the wisdom of the General Assembly to pass that. In the face of every mental health professional says it's not a good idea when we testify. But if they do it, they still got to do it as well as they can.
Part of talk therapy.
It's got to be part of ongoing therapy, and it's got to be monitored.
Okay.
And it's got to be the last treatment that's recommended, not the first. Okay.
All right.
So that's one piece of legislation. The other piece of legislation is, of course, the effort to legalize for recreational purposes. That's just a terribly bad idea. The Rand Corporation a year and a half ago said, you're not going to know what the real impacts in Colorado are and all these other areas for 5 years. So why wouldn't we take that advice and wait 5 years? Secondly, they're saying that you really should change or make sure that your supply architecture, the way it's produced, packaged, distributed, processed, that needs to be controlled, and that often the best way to do that is to have the state manage that and then let it be retailed through compassion centers and so forth. Well,
I have a problem with that because that makes it more expensive for patients who might really need it.
Actually, it will allow control of the pricing according to the Rand Corporation. That model allows you to control it. It gives you much more predictability on the revenue side. It makes the public safety issues in terms of being able to control the security in the growing facility and transportation much, much more predictable. Now, that would be, certainly as a former businessman, as a former elected official, and as a mental health professional, I want to pay attention to that potential change. That's a bill I would support. That's a bill I would love to help formulate and write.
All right, well, I'm not involved in
Patricia,
either
you
of
and I
them.
are probably going to
Except I'm going to have to know, yeah.
You and I are probably going to
Yeah, we're probably going to, at any rate. On that, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Red team, listen up. It's Mark from the bunker. I just got back. Yesterday I heard senators chuckle about a new nickname they have for Senator Chacon. They call him Pine Cone. I figured there has to be something behind this bill he keeps putting in to keep plant material in the yard it grew in. It's a $500 fine now, according to him, to have leaves blow into your yard. Wait a minute. I had to make a covert excursion to North Providence to get to the bottom of this. And here it is, I just got back. That's the actual tree that put pine cones apparently in the white shag carpet in Chacon's living room. Oh, it's gonna be tough to get those suckers out. Listen, I'm gonna interrogate this tree so that the House does not have to do what the Senate did and vote on this silliness. Hey, tree, are those your pine needles? The silent treatment. Now, we can use DNA analysis. Okay. I am going to get to the bottom of Operation Pinecone, and I'm going to do it successfully. It's time now for enhanced interrogation. This is Mark from the bunker.
We're about to move on to Jeff Richard's segment on adult coloring books. Before we do, here's a sneak peek at next week's show. Joining us will be Leigh Ann Sennick, president of the Federation of Republican Women. She will talk with Pat Morgan on the subject of the war on everyone. Tune in next week, right here on Common Sense, Rhode Island.
This past Christmas, my wife and I gathered with the extended family for eats and the annual Yankee swap. You know, that one where you have no clue what you might end up with and not be able to get someone to take off your hands. So it was my wife's turn, and she picked out a present, gently unwrapped it, and looked surprised at what she had, but smiled in thanks to that singularly thoughtful, unknown member of the group that had purchased the gift. Yankee swaps are very political. Now, she held up her new present, 2 coloring books. Okay, remember now, you had to be an adult to have a present in the game. Not having picked the Christmas tree ball with the number 1 lovingly painted on it, she had to hope that someone in the milling crowd would consider coloring again. At least they might want to have them to give to their kids. Nope, didn't happen, so we brought them home and she gave them away. Well, it seems the purchaser of these books was ahead of us all. We had no idea that adult coloring was the new craze. Seems we adults are reacquainting ourselves with coloring books. Now, way back when, most of us did the coloring thing. Then we graduated to painting by the numbers. And then the truly gifted amongst us started drawing and painting, and so on it went. Well, it's back. Now all of us with our previously marginal skills can apply them again, trying to stay within the lines and on the paper. If you were to go into a senior center, a nursing home, or a public library, in increasing numbers, you would see groups of folks coloring away. Some in a class, others just hanging around to color. There are even coloring clubs springing up. Because the craze didn't start up until 2013, the market has been expanding in leaps and bounds as more and more adults have joined in. Amazon's top 20 selling books included 8 coloring books last year. The New York Times bestseller list of 2015 included a coloring book created by Johanna Basford. Miss Basford published her first volume in 2013. She has sold more than 16 million copies worldwide. Her first 3 books are considered a substantial reason for the new interest in coloring. Now the big publishing houses and a bunch of startups are following in her path. Crayola has a kit with 50 colored pencils, 20 markers, 12 coloring pages. Cost you $22.49 to get in the game. But if you still have all the kid coloring stuff we can't seem to get rid of, you can hit the retailers and get your own books. I took a look at what Amazon Prime would let me buy. The first several books were all under $10. The second on the list could be had for $8.73. I found it interesting that if you wanted to spend only $3.72, you could have one of the 70 offerings of used and new books. Wonder how used any of them would be. One publisher, Sky House Publishing, has sold more than 3 million ACBs since it began selling them in June of 2015. No way. They have 32 different adult coloring books in print, with another 25 scheduled for publication. Because this is entrepreneurial America we live in, the spin-offs are already here. You can buy coloring journals, coloring calendars, diaries, greeting cards, note cards, stickers, posters, and other stuff all ready for you to color on. Why are we oldsters back in our coloring books? Well, lots of us don't do the handheld electronic stuff. And many of us have stress for pick a reason. So the claim is coloring is relaxing. It allows for free expression. You don't have to stay within the lines if you don't want to, and you can use whatever color suits your fancy. Coloring improves hand-eye coordination and improves fine motor skills. Great things for folks in the Alzheimer's ward. There is an organization, always seems to be one for everything in America, called the American Art Therapy Association that advocates coloring for self-care regimens. And you can now find a coloring book on any subject you can think of. Most popular seem to be the nature books. But if you like Harry Potter or the zombies, no problem. And every day another subject gets into the mix. Here are 2 examples of owls. You can see this very well. Owls, you can color. Whimsical creature, the owl. Thank you for watching, and God bless.